couple months ago when I was on as a co-host, I opened up this topic of buzzwords of ignorance, or things that you hear in often political discourse. And today I want to talk about the Christian nation buzzword of ignorance. And what I mean by this is words used because of their emotional connotation, where the speaker is relying on the assumed ignorance of the audience who is being manipulated by that speaker. And these words are usually used for propaganda purposes or political purposes. And the last time I talked about the notion of the Judeo-Christian values, that sort of thing. And this is kind of a closely related topic where we're talking about the founding of the nation and whether this really is a Christian nation or not. And the fact is, it's not a Christian nation. There are a lot of Christians in the United States, a majority. But that doesn't make it a Christian nation. We're an explicitly secular nation with a strong separation of church and state in our Constitution and our founding documents. And there are people chipping away at that sort of thing, but it's not a Christian nation.
It's right there in the First Amendment, despite what Christine O'Donnell thinks.
Right. So we'll hit on that at some point here. So the purpose of this myth, I think, is like an ego stroke for Christians. It's sort of saying that Christians have a special place. You get to railroad your religion through when other people don't get to. Often it's used in pandering for votes, where political candidates will say, "Oh, we're a Christian nation, and I'm Christian, so vote for me." And it's really sort of a form of Christian imperialism, where it's like an explicit propaganda campaign to promote Christianity in the greater culture. And as we'll see, it's often done at the expense of truth. So historically, I think it would be worth mentioning the fact that we had this Red Scare in the 50s, when the Cold War, and there was a lot of trouble with the U.S. and Russia, and especially after World War II. And there needed to be a way of distinguishing the United States from Russia. And they hit upon this propaganda idea that, oh, well, we believe in God, and those Russians are those atheist communists, and that's how we're going to do it. And so there really was a propaganda campaign at that time that unfortunately ran the name of atheism through the mud and made it very, very difficult for people who didn't believe to be considered patriots. And it was a kind of unfortunate time, I think. You know, today we're rehabilitating the word atheism. None of the atheists I know are into communism. It's a ridiculous association as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, but this propaganda campaign has continued on in recent years, and it's especially true, I think, since the rise of the religious right in the Republican Party. You see it quite a bit, and it's still going on today. And it's being promoted by a bunch of deceptive tactics. And I wanted to hit on a few of those tactics and talk about some examples of what those were, and then we'll wrap up. So one of the tactics they use is they put words in dead people's mouths. And this reminds me so much of these fake deathbed conversions that people supposedly had, where, on their deathbed they converted to Christianity.
As if that would matter.
Well, as if that would matter, but also, you know, they're not around they're dead, so they can't come around and you know, fix the lie. So what you see is we see a lot of fake founders quotes, founding fathers, that they're, you know, overtly Christian, these sorts of things. And I think one of the big sources of these fake quotes is a guy by the name of David Barton, who is rather infamous here in Texas and across the nation. He is a political operative with the Republican Party. He's also a reverend, and I think he makes most of his money by being a propagandist. He creates these lies about Christianity and promotes them and makes money selling this stuff. So that's you know, he's pretty famous, I think, for making up false quotes, and you can look on the internet and find those. Another example is inflating the importance of religious quotes. You know, the Christian nation folks are very fond of finding quotes where somebody in political power said something nice about Christianity, as if that really means anything. We have a lot of Christians that have been in power over the years, and a lot of non-Christians, and you know, if somebody said something nice about Christianity or belief in God, it doesn't necessarily mean we're a Christian nation. So, but there's this idea that these quotes are somehow significant when they're really not. Another example is suppressing disconfirming evidence. So, for example, we have one of the main things that atheists like to bring up is the Treaty of Tripoli, where in the 1796, the U.S. government, the brand new U.S. government, actually had a treaty with the country of Tripoli and said that the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. And this was, I believe, unanimously signed by the Congress of that time. And, you know, if you really want to say that this is a Christian nation, boy, you really need to answer to this particular thing, but often you'll find that people who are promoting the Christian nation idea will skip right over this. Or they'll skip right over the fact that the Constitution, I think it's Article 6, has an explicit ban on religious tests of public office. You know, this is getting back to our secular church-state separation idea. Or the First Amendment that sort of bans government involvement in religion. These things are explicit in the Constitution, and people like to, you know, kind of hide out and pretend that those aren't there. Another tactic is outright lies. There's the mythology that prayer was needed at the Constitutional Convention, and our nation was saved by prayer there, and it's just false. There's the claim that the U.S. laws were based on the Ten Commandments, and this claim is so old that even Jefferson himself had to dispel it in a letter to Thomas Cooper in 1814. And the answer there is that the U.S. laws, the core laws, came from British common law, which was in place long before Christianity made it into Britain. So, you know, the key laws of not killing and not stealing and these sorts of things are that old that they predated Christianity's involvement in that area of the world. Anyway, so this is just an outright lie. Another tactic they use to promote the Christian nation idea is equivocation, and you see this a lot in the notion of God. And a lot of the a lot of the founders were deists, so they believe in a God that a God of nature, or the God that sort of created the universe but then set it loose and let it run. And it's a very different notion of God than the Christian God of somebody you pray to and interact with and get favors from, that sort of thing. But there's a lot of equivocation of these two things. These are two very different religious concepts, but a lot of Christians would want to claim the deists as Bible-believing Christians, when many of them spoke out vociferously against the Bible and the Christian religion. And among those are Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and Adams and Madison were some of the big ones that really, Thomas Paine, of course. So a lot of those founders, you know, really sort of had it out for Christianity, or didn't believe in it. Yet they built a nation that tolerated that, and had tolerated those religious beliefs. Another example of equivocation is in the First Amendment and how it's interpreted. A lot of people will say, oh, well, the First Amendment prohibits the establishment of religion, but in actuality it prevents an establishment of religion. And the founders chose their words carefully. They really sort of knew what they were doing, with possible exception of the Second Amendment, which was very ambiguous. But the First Amendment is quite clear that the U.S. government is not to be creating an establishment of religion, so it's not supposed to be endorsing religion of any sort. Another equivocation is people will say, oh, well, this wall of separation of church and state really means that the government's not supposed to mess with the religion. It's really a one-way magic trapdoor thing.
Yeah.
And
it's the first wall I've heard of that actually works that way. But
yeah. And it's not like, you know, these founders were well-educated people. If they knew what a trapdoor was, they could have used that terminology. I mean, they you know, a wall is not semi-permeable in one direction. Anyway, it's just ridiculous. Finally, another way is myth-making, or creating stories about that sort of associate sort of a biblical narrative with the narrative of the country. And you see that, for example, with conflating of Moses and George Washington. And the idea is that Washington was the United States is Moses, and he came down and he revealed the God's law or whatever, and God's favor to the great nation, and all this. And a lot of the Christian nation folks want to turn Washington into this big Bible believer, but Washington, I think, of all the founders, was one of the most private about his religious beliefs, and I think he'd be turning over in his grave if he could, about being used as a shill for somebody's religion. It's very likely he was a deist, like Franklin and Jefferson and many of the other founders. He never took communion. He never spoke about Jesus or the Christian side of things, and.
It's generally not fair to I wouldn't think to lump Washington in as a deist. While he was more private about his religion, there are examples from his own writing of him saying that he identifies as a Christian, etc.
Okay. Okay.
Now, whether how much of that is lip service or not, but I have to go by, if you say this is what you are, okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have no reason to. If Don tells me he's an atheist, I'm going to accept him at his word. Why would I do anything different?
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, so I've listed a whole bunch of ways in which Christians promote this Christian nation myth, and in ways that are, I think, deceptive and dishonest. And, many Christians have made great contributions to the United States. Why is that not enough? Why is there a need to lie? And if you have an answer to that, give us a call. My answer is that Christianity needs lies to promote it, because it's really kind of an awful religion, and it needs lies to gloss over its failings. Anyway, so there's my presentation.